Let's go back then to the proposed Middle East peace plan put forward by America and Israel in Washington today. John Lyndon is the European Director of the Alliance for Middle East Peace, which is a network of NGOs promoting reconciliation between Israelis and Palestinians. Joins us now from Paris. A very good evening to you. Can this proposal that we heard from Donald Trump today be the basis of a settlement and therefore of peace, do you think?
The very short answer is no, if the premise supposes that it would require Palestinian consent. The idea of peace would require both parties to a conflict to consent to the ending of conflict and to the sort of fundamentals of any deal. And the Palestinians have been frozen out of this process since its outset. They have been, some would argue, kind of humiliated throughout the process with sort of a stream of decisions coming from the White House, which was seen as disadvantageous to the Palestinian position. And all that led, of course, to the plan that we saw today, which is very, very far from acceptable for almost any Palestinians, I would say, on all of the key final status issues. So very few commentators I have read or heard have suggested that it's going to form the basis of a final agreement between Israelis and Palestinians. So the question really has to be, what is the utility of this plan? Why is it out there? And what is it designed to achieve?
Well, indeed. And what's your answer to that?
My worry is that this is, in addition to being quite advantageous to both President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu in election years, that it's also, number one, trying to permanently change some of the policy architecture with regards to final status and to try and guarantee that any future negotiations start from a position that's closer to the terms of this document, which would undo generations, really, of work in this space. We're really trying to craft positions on final status that can be agreeable to majorities of both people. But more urgently, my worry is that it may be sort of laying the table for an immediate annexation for part of the West Bank. And we've already seen statements coming this evening from Israel, from the Defense Minister Naftali Bennett, saying that Israel is going to have a government or a cabinet vote on Sunday around immediate annexation of up to 30% of the West Bank, which would conclusively kill a two-state solution should that be carried out. And these are very fast-developing events, which I think should disturb everybody who's invested in the idea of a just Israeli-Palestinian peace.
Yes, and indeed, this is election year for both men. One has also been impeached, the other has been indicted too. So it's obviously a difficult time for both of them. Going back to your idea of the immediate annexation, President Trump tweeted out a map saying this is what the State of Palestine could look like. And if you look at that, it's quite small, but the green dots are the Palestinian areas. And it's clearly not a contiguous state. There's huge chunks been taken out of the West Bank, and right down in the south there, the area of Palestinian land listed as residential and agricultural use is described, as our correspondent today, as being in the desert. Clearly, this is going to be very difficult and has already prompted a lot of Arab anger, hasn't it?
It has. It contravenes the Arab League's position on all final status issues, which are in the Arab Peace Initiative, which has been renewed every year now since 2002. And from a Palestinian perspective, whatever you think about the rights and wrongs of either party in this conflict, it only ends if both parties feel the agreement is satisfactory and they can actually end war, end conflict. That's a basic definition of peace. And the terms of this document seem much closer to Palestinian humiliation, I'm afraid to say, which, from an efficacy point of view, I worry would actually unleash further rounds of violence. And again, if by some magical diplomacy we did end up getting Palestinian consent or Arab pressure for an agreement along these lines, it's hard to imagine how it would work. You're going to have around 227 isolated enclaves for the Palestinians with very little contiguous contact between each of them. We're surrounded on 360 degrees by Israel with permanent occupation, essentially, and control of the West Bank. That is not a recipe for a generation of Palestinians to put aside conflict with Israel and turn the page. And I feel Israelis are being cheated because of that also, because Israelis want to see peace. They want to see an end of claims. They want to see final borders. And this formula, whilst it might feel good for many Israelis to see so many things they've asked for be all one after another delivered by the most powerful person in the world, it's not going to make Israelis safe, secure in the region over the long term. And in that sense, it's a disservice to both parties.
There is an offer on the table to the Palestinians, though, isn't there, that there would be a 4-year freeze on new settlement activity while Palestinian statehood was negotiated. The offer, too, of a capital in eastern Jerusalem, not East Jerusalem, I guess. Will that be difficult, do you think? Jerusalem has long been fought over.
Yeah, I mean, there's been talk of this for quite a while. Neighborhoods like Abu Dis in eastern Jerusalem, which really aren't part of the city of Jerusalem as we imagine it and perceive it, being given to the Palestinians as like a symbolic capital that would essentially be a box ticking exercise. If you look at each element, which perhaps on the face of it could be presented as a gain for the Palestinians, there's always at least one detail, or very often more than one, that actually undercut it. So with the projected settlement freeze for 4 years, it would, if executed, only be in around 60% of the West Bank, 60 to 70% of the West Bank, whereas the remainder would be annexed by Israel. So even if the settlements did not expand into those areas during the duration of the freeze, it's sort of a dead letter, because the idea of the freeze is that it maintains the viability of two states, and that would already have been taken off the table by almost a third of the West Bank being annexed by the State of Israel. So it's hard to see a real net gain for the Palestinians on any final status issue. And I think myself and a lot of people wanted to look at this and see whether there was something that could be grappled with, taken advantage of. And my honest account is that there really isn't. And what there is instead is a lot of jeopardy. Because it's taken a long time to get to some basic ideas around consensus on some of these issues. A lot of people have spent careers essentially trying to fashion them, and we have to be very careful to suddenly tear them all asunder and really eliminate the idea, I'm afraid to say, of territorial partition. And I worry that's where we're going, because we haven't equipped Israelis and Palestinians, particularly young Israelis and Palestinians, who are so disconnected from one another, so separated, more so than any generation we've seen before, with the tools to really live together. And this plan, with its sort of basic supposition that it will be rejected, is hurtling us toward the end of partition as a paradigm. And then it means Israelis and Palestinians will have to figure out a way to live together in some way. And whilst I wouldn't dismiss that idea out of hand, we have to do the groundwork to prepare them for that. And a lot of the additional details in the deal around, intense separation, continued military occupation, they don't prepare societies for sharing policy and land and symbols and all the things that sort of messy compromise would require. So we should be very careful throwing away what we have, as imperfect as it is, to go into a reality that nobody's really mapped out yet.
We're expecting to see President Trump depart any minute now, actually, for another campaign rally. As far as he's concerned, it's a job well done by his son-in-law, Jared Kushner. Where do you see this going, just briefly?
I think Palestinians have already rejected it. The plan is sort of engineered in such a way that would trigger Israel being allowed to make moves such as annexation. If that takes place over the next few days, I wonder what role European states, the UK, the Arab world may have in trying to delay or prevent that. If it does take place, I think things could escalate very quickly. There's elements in this deal around worship on the Temple Mount and some heavy symbolic things, which if picked up and utilized by extremist actors could actually result in
Oh, apologies. I think we're just beginning to lose you, John Lyndon, there. Apologies. We'll call it today. Thank you very much indeed for your thoughts there. European Director of the Alliance for Middle East Peace. And as I said, we'll expect to see President Trump outside the White House imminently.